John, welcome, man. Thanks for joining the show today. I'm excited to have you. This is one of those conversations that I've been very eager to have, as most guests that we invite on the show, because there's a lot of wisdom that you have in your journey and your life's work so far. Not only in the frame of business, and that's really the thing we're going to look at today together and kind of put between us and move around is this idea of intentional leadership and like redefining success, not only for business, but in your life too. And I want to use your entrepreneurial journey as a gateway to get us into the other side of the sphere, which is the balance in your life. And your journey started, just to give people an overview of who you are briefly, and then obviously you're going to share some color too. You've had multiple businesses that you've run and been at the helm of. Most recently, you were at a e-commerce company called Loop Returns. Just under $200 million in investment dollars, hundreds of people on staff, like 400 plus clients around the world, like a pretty large, respectively organization. And a lot of that growth, I think, and this is something that you and I have talked about before. To get to that point, there is this stigma, the storied stigma, where you got to sacrifice something. Like it's a zero sum game, and you're going to lose maybe your relationships with your wife or your children or people in your life. You're going to have to do things that maybe contradict your values to get there. And I think you've led a different path to get there. And I've seen that in your journey and knowing you. And I want to talk about that balance today in this sphere. And so that's the frame I'm setting for our conversation. And as always, we'll go down whatever route we want to go down. But I'm excited. I'm grateful. Thank you for being here, my friend. It's good to see
Yeah,
your
Phil,
face and have
thanks
you on the
thanks for having
show.
me, man. I'm fired up to chat. And yeah, just grateful to get to share a little bit of my story. And honestly, aside from that, just to spend some time with you. So I'm looking forward to it very much.
Yeah, man. Well, let's jump in. So, I mentioned I want to use your business journey and your entrepreneurial journey as a gateway. So let's start there. So I want to say, like I said, those criteria before, and please, as you feel like, add more things to that journey from your perspective, because you were in the seat, leading that company and helping that company grow over the last 4 or 5 years or more. You led that company to incredible milestones, but what do you think from the frame of the leader, the tip of the spear, were some of the key principles for that intentional leadership in the context of business to get that company to grow as it did, to bring on the people that you did, to have people grow internally and have everybody humming? What are some of the principles that you use that worked really well in the
Yeah, I
context of
mean,
business?
intentionality is certainly what comes to mind with a leadership style. I might start with what will sound like a weird anecdote, but I'll tell a little bit of a story and then try to bring that back. Um, the headline, my wife often says, "You can have anything, you just can't have everything." And I think that tracks. But the anecdote, so my dad passed when I was in college. He was an entrepreneur, very different world than I was. He was insulated glass and sold to window companies, and did physical stuff underneath a glass washer on the floor of a warehouse. And I'm building software sitting at a computer. But I came home one semester in college with a couple like C's on my semester report card or whatever. And he like sat down and got out his like sheet of graph paper and he was like, all right, I won't bore you with the whole story, but he's like, all right, how many hours a week of class do you have? And he's like, 16. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you got to walk to class. And so we'll call it 20. I'm like, all right, 20 hours of class a week. He's like, what else do you want to do? And he's like, oh, you want to work out? How long you want to work out? I'm like, I don't know, an hour 3 times a week. He's like, I'll tell you what, hour and a half, 7 days a week. We'll just write all that stuff down. What else? You want to play video games? Yeah, blah blah blah. You go through all this sort of stuff, and end of the day, he totals up all the hours. He's like, oh, you want to, how much you want to sleep? I'm like 7 hours a night. He's like, call it 8.5. Adds all these things in, and at the end, like we're there, and there's like 25 or 30 hours left over after like meals and hanging out with friends and all sort of stuff. And he's just like, can you there's like, I don't know what it was, 26 hours left or something. And he was like, can you just spend like 6 of those studying, please? And it was like this great wisdom that I didn't really internalize it at 19 years old or whatever it was, but is very uh, practical with, how I sort of spend my life and my time today is like, you've only got so many hours a day. Similar to what my wife says with like, you can have anything, you just can't have everything. Like a lot of people let their calendars fill up and become a collection of their distractions, and I try to have my calendar fill up and be a collection of my priorities. And like a little example that we'll get into some of this leadership stuff, I think, finally, is it's like, okay, well, what do I want? And I want to be able to work out every day. I want to be able to spend an hour with my kids in the morning before they go to school. I want to be able to spend an hour with my family having dinner. I want to sleep 7+ hours. And when you fit all that stuff together, there is only so much time for other things. Um, and I also find myself like my productive hours are the mornings. And I like the more I like if I have a better workout and I sleep better, my willpower lasts longer throughout the day. But like I can't do hard things at 4 p.m. as well as I can do them at 8 a.m. And so I structure my days like I do maker mornings and manager afternoons, where like the work that I actually have to do myself, producing work, is in the mornings, and then afternoons are where I give my time back to other people. I'm certainly an extrovert, so I can sit in meetings and be re-energized, and I can do that when I'm tired and later in the day. And then I'm very structured. I suppose in some ways like rigid with my time. Where Mondays are typically a planning day, and then I sort of have themes um, to my days throughout the rest of the week. Um, but I guess when I think of like leading teams and people, like you can't lead anybody until you can lead yourself, and that's like a lesson I had to learn pretty early. And I used to try to be I used to try to be a leader, and I like wasn't accountable, and I wasn't organized, and I didn't prioritize my time well. And like, you are what you tolerate. And if I show up expecting, and you've sort of got to be authentic too. And if I show up and I expect people to be accountable and organized and diligent, and I'm not accountable and organized and diligent myself, like why would anyone believe me or want to work for or with me or alongside me, or anything like that? So I tend to think like to successfully lead a business, it all has to start with like yourself and then your closest relationships. And like if that stuff's a mess, you're just pushing your chaos out into the world. Like companies are a representation of their founders and their leaders, and like that culture really does start at the top. And I'm still far from perfect. And it's what's the pick your cliche, the journey, not the destination, or something like that. But like what I hope everyone who can work with me, or who has worked with me, can say is like they saw me investing in getting better. They saw me working on my weaknesses. They saw me leaning into my strengths, and that like the leader I was in one 6 month period wasn't as good as the leader I was in the next and the next, and the next. And um, I'll maybe we could go down a number of avenues there. But I think like being really principled and intentional, and then like I guess if I were to parlay that into a company, like setting up your core values as like um, tried and true principles of like how you behave under pressure and what is truly like non-negotiable, and being able to be really clear about what embodying those is and what violating them is, and then kind of building, kind of building from there.
Dude, man, I love what you just said there, and I'm just gonna regurgitate this, and you can tell me if I'm saying this back in a way that you would agree with. Is that one of the key principles that you would say and kinda check the box and say, "Yep, this is what I would, coach a founder on, or if I'm starting a business again, this is what I would do," is that a key principle is that the founder or founders have to embody a level of self-awareness. Like, that they have to, like, become so self-aware and so clear on themselves before they go lead other people and lead an organization to growth. They have to be able to lead themselves first. I mean, that's what I heard you say, and I think it's a profound statement that I would completely agree with. The thing that you said that I wanted to go down in terms of an avenue that I think is important for people listening as they think about their journey is that all of us have our own path, right? Like some are going to do what you've done and go grow businesses in various sizes and scales. Some are going to go become high performing employees, whatever it might be. Some are going to people are just going to be people that care for other people, like and if they're a mother or father and they're caring for their families. I think what's interesting about your journey is that I'm curious is like where were some of those pitfalls for you early on where you had to like really become clear on yourself and the things that weren't working? Like, what were some of the hardest decisions you had to make? And business being maybe the reflective mirror to you, or maybe something else. Maybe it wasn't business at all. Maybe it was your relationship with your wife or your kids. Like, what were some of those moments along the journey where you had to use that mirror moment to come back and say, "Oh wow, like I need to get more clear. I need to get more clear on what is really important to me, so I can do the right thing for my business, my family, etc."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great question. Where my mind goes first is to almost say like, and then I'll start with a little bit of like a mental model or something like that too. But I was just reflecting with a buddy the other day and just talked about like, man, like the trials and tribulations and the hardships are where 99% of the growth has happened. And when I look back at my life and what's been transformative, like nothing related to success has been transformative, and everything related to failure has. And so that's maybe like a foundational element. When I talk to aspiring entrepreneurs, aspiring founders, entrepreneurial minded humans, one of the things I've found true, and that I share often, I sort of say like, hey, you may have all these things you think are going to be great about entrepreneurship or about this journey, but I think at the end of the day, like the greatest gift of entrepreneurship is really that you just get to learn a couple important lessons way earlier in your life than you would, otherwise. And I think those 2 lessons, are really, like, the things that you thought you always wanted and that would make you mean nothing, and the things that you thought would, like, break you and destroy you don't. Um, and, like, if I'm grateful for any one thing, like, I got to learn that in my early 30s instead of at, like, 80. And, like, you have these high highs that you think are gonna fill some void in your life, and they just don't. And then you have these hard, disastrous experiences that you think are gonna break you, and, like, then you're still here and you still have a great life and you still have a lot of gratitude, and, you're like, "Oh, like, neither of those ends of the spectrum really matter that much," and, what a gift that was. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess to then be more acute and not just principled, on a response to your question, you know, there are 2 like running a business with a business partner in many cases is like a marriage. I suppose in yours it's also a marriage. But it's having a business partner is like having a spouse. And I have a failed business partnership in my past, um, where what's like a breakthrough to me, like if you were asking me to define a breakthrough, it's like it's learning that something you would have promised yourself was false is true, or you learn that something you would have told yourself is true is actually false, and you have to learn that like you're not correct. And like, man, I just learned that like stories I was telling myself about how I felt and what I wanted and what I thought about my business partner and all of these things were true, and then I learned that they weren't. And then like having to reconcile like, oh my goodness, how could I have been so sure of something that turned out to be completely, false when I sat in my head and had to like reconcile this moment. And then like the other side of that, right, is like coming all the way through like grief and trauma and realizing like my responsibility and all of that. So I can feel like I was wronged or I can feel frustrated. But at the end of the day, like I made all of those decisions and I had the authority and I had the power and I had the agency to do all those things. And like, like I can try to blame someone else, but at the end of the day, like every one of those doors that was open was a door I opened myself, and every one that was closed was a door I closed myself. And like, that's one. So a failed business partnership. And then the other was like winding down my first business or selling my first business, and just like all of the ego and identity that was tied up in that, and seeing it kind of like not go the way that you want, and then having to reconcile that. But I mean, those are the two big hardship moments, and then to, I guess, plant a seed that maybe we end up going down on the other side. Like the other side that was just some incredible grace was a business partner in Loop, who was the founding CEO. When I asked him if he would mind if I stepped in, he graciously stepped aside so that I could like take that role when I really like needed it at that moment in my life. So that was like a just a really humbling experience, and then has actually made my transition out of Loop now, far easier and more straightforward, because um, someone showed me such grace and humility at that moment, and for me to be able to step aside now, or to do anything other than sort of step aside now as the business hits this next phase of growth would be such hypocrisy of me that it just sort of laid the foundation for all of this. So anyway, happy to, like, we can dig into more of those if you want, but those are like the when I, if you were asking me to like plot a line of my entrepreneurial journey, those four moments, like failed business partnership, ego and identity, stepping into the CEO role because someone else allowed it, and then stepping out of the CEO role, like those are you know, the four biggest moments of the last, decade, at least on the professional side.
Man, and such such kudos to you, brother, and admiration, right? I want to just share a little bit of mirror for you from, friend to a friend, also going through the journeys of life and business and marriage and all the things that come along with it. It's and parenthood is that you're willing to look at those things, that you're willing to like take the time to reflect on those moments in your life, admire them, feel them, let them flow, learn from them, and allow them to influence things that you do in the future. And I think that back to that point number one that we talked about, that embodiment of awareness in yourself to be able to say, I see these things, you can clearly outline them, and now you're using them. And as most recent as the last couple of months in your journey of transitioning from the CEO to more of a board seat and then onto the next venture in your life. I think that skill is such an admirable skill that really kind of drives home point one and point two. So I'm really grateful that you shared that, and you took us into a place that I want to go to that is really interesting. And you mentioned this when you first started talking about, how a leader becomes aware and leads a great company. You mentioned something like you mentioned going to like your productive mornings, like you're making your mornings and then you're meeting afternoons and your collaborative afternoons. I'm curious, like the nuances of the exploration for you, like, and maybe this is some of the models or tactics that you've used in that journey throughout your growth and entrepreneurship, and then also as life's grown. What are some of the things that you've done in order to become more tuned in to those experiences in yourself? And could you share some of those practices that might be helping people say, like, great, like he's done these things, he's recognized these things, but what are the things that he's doing that actually like allows him to
Mhm.
tune in like that and become so aware in himself and his
Yeah,
leadership?
yeah, happy to share on both fronts, of sort of how I got there. When I say both, I think it's often like rhythms and rituals, and so I'll talk about some of those things. I'll share a bit of a mental model as well. Rhythms and which rituals, uh, prayer and meditation, have both played a pretty meaningful role in that. Um, have had, a bit of a plant medicine experience, as well, that's been meaningful. I think, they're all different tools, and certainly wouldn't necessarily advocate for any one more than the other. But I think, like rhythms and rituals, and then finding ways to use, prayer and meditation quite often, and then finding even just like meditation in other things. Like, if you think about what meditation is, like running has become meditative for me, because as has lifting in different ways. And I talk about like two different types of meditation. One is like when you have no room for thoughts or there's nothing in your mind, and the other is being able to like process things in your mind. And so like lifting weights, for example, like there is no room for anything in your mind when you're moving a heavy weight. So you force yourself into complete presence. And then running, for example, like if I'm on a long run outside, uh, that can become a place where I can process and work through my thoughts. And I think of those as two different like avenues of meditation. Um, Prayer is journaling as well. I think of both of them actually really similar. Like maybe to share a bit of like a mental model. Now I'll hit two different sides. Like my mind is so busy, and I often think of it like back when we all had our Apple headphones, and like you had headphones and cords in your pocket, and they would get all wound up, and like if they're all wound up in your pocket and you pull on one of them, the whole cluster moves. And if you pull on the other one, the whole cluster moves. And like when things are busy in your mind, you can't tell where one thought starts and the other one ends. And so I think of like running and being able to process those thoughts, or journaling, or prayer and surrender, is like unwinding those threads and laying them out cleanly so that I can see like, oh, the beginning and the end of this thought are here, and this the beginning and the end of this thought are here, and you can space those things out in a way where you can actually make sense of what's going on in your mind. Um, yeah, so those have been really powerful. The other like mental model for me probably hits some themes of like reflection and intentionality. But I think of my mind often like a combination of hardware and software. So like a computer with an operating system, for example. And like just bear with me. It's maybe a long metaphor, but like um, once you have kids, like I remember being in college and driving down to Oxford, Ohio, to Miami, and like it'd be like 4.5 hours later, and my mom would text me like immediately as I was getting into Oxford. I'm like, how like why is she so worried about this? And now with kids, I realize like, oh, it like to become a parent, you actually like need to install more RAM in your brain, because for the rest of your life, you've just got this low level background process running forever. And so like, the same way like you when you boot up your computer, there are just processes running in the background that are there forever. Like I've now got like hate as a process running in my brain for the rest of my life. And I've got James as a process running in my brain for the rest of my life. And so like I need these like RAM upgrades. Um, and then to take it a little bit further, like, you know, uh, I've to like almost make it funny. Like I work with some people and have worked with some people in the past who like never reboot their computer. And I'm like, are you insane? Like, do you know how slow your computer is after 3 days of no reboot? So like, I think of like, to stick with that metaphor, like there are minor operating system upgrades, there are major operating system upgrades, and there are like hardware upgrades. And like with a computer, like I would never, if I got a new computer tomorrow, I would never ever ever for any reason use Apple's migration assistant and move everything over. Like it's just not how I roll. I'm like like I love a completely fresh operating system install, and then I'm like, cool, what applications do I need on that OS? And I'm not going to install all the old background shit that I used to use. I'm only going to install what I need to be able to access the stuff that matters most to me. And so I think about my life like that often. Like I do like the reboots weekly, and I have a Sunday ritual where I look back at my week and my calendar and my notes, and I process all of it, and I organize all of it, and I follow up with people or whatever. And like that's my like reboot. And then my like minor version upgrades or operating system upgrades are probably quarterly, bigger reflections, and I like assess how I'm spending my time and do that. And then occasionally I get like to have an entirely new computer, and I install an entirely new operating system. And I'm in a little bit of that phase right now where I'm like, huh, I don't have to do anything. So how am I going to re-architect my life and my calendar in this new moment? And like, I don't need old version 2.0 of Jonathan Poma, or I don't need these artifacts. I can like completely fresh look and say like, cool, what is most important to me, and how can I optimize my entire hardware, software integration of the operating system to enable me to do exactly what I want to do best? And so you could, if you like playing video games, you would get the best GPU on the planet from NVIDIA on your machine, so you have lots of compute. And if you value mobility, you might go get a netbook and that is always connected to the internet. And like there's a world between those things, but like I think of my brain like like a computer with an operating system, and like what are my reboots, what are my minor operating system upgrades, what are my major operating system upgrades, and what are my hardware upgrades. And I just sort of like pattern match all that stuff into like how I plan on weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, and annual, rhythms.
Man, dude, it is such a great visual metaphor for anyone, and I often use that also. We've shared this on the trail and things like that as we've walked and taken hikes and had these talks, but the idea that, like, you're accumulating junk like as you go through, right? Like these processes are you download a program, you get like X amount of junk that comes with the program. It slows down your computer. You're doing this and that. And you're just building on these things. Maybe you're downloading things as you need them, but having those moments to say, like, great, like now it's time to wipe this clean, reboot it, minor, major, whatever you're looking at, and what it takes in which to do that, what it takes to actually reboot the whole system. In fact, you use this, I'll share this with the audience on our side. Like, my wife and I just had this moment the other day, and we'll get into this in a moment, and have you talk about this with you and Whitney. But the the idea of an operating system is something that we use in our family rhythms a lot, and we think about our time as an operating system in a big way. And we had this moment the other day on a date, Krista and I, where we said, "Wow, we think our OS is out of date. Like we're running an old program for what we need." And what it just came in a conversation that was super reflective. We were like, this is where we need to go. And this is the time constraints that we need to do what's of value now. And now let's switch our entire time OS and our family operating and rhythm model to make this thing work. And we shifted. And now we're spending our days and weeks completely differently than we were 3 weeks ago. And it's so refreshing. And it just was that moment where you're like, wow, I'm definitely out. I'm running an outdated OS here. I need to like upgrade the software. And I think it's such a great visual metaphor, and it takes me into um, how you're thinking is so aligned with the theme of this conversation, the framing, because I'm going to say like a bold statement here. And I think that many may be like, yeah, I get the stigma, and I've heard this story before, but to amass a level of success, I always put success in air quotes, a massive level of success in business, like there is this like stigma story about like you gotta like just leave some things behind, right? Important things, right? Like you have to compromise your values, right? And this is like maybe I need to like lose touch with my wife and my children, right? As a provider in the organization, I can't be as much of a provider at home other than just with money. All these things are like this stigmatized thing about success because I think sometimes the story is you lose sight of your values. You lose sight of your values and what it means because you get swallowed up in the day-to-day operating of what that quote unquote computer is doing to keep up with the growths and swells of life. So my question for you, brother, is when you think about that balance, that intentional leadership, not only in your businesses that you've had the chance to grow, but also in your life as it's grown with your wife and now two children, your health, as you mentioned earlier, two meditation practices of running and lifting are very focused on your health and well-being and longevity. How are you and your wife specifically as the other founder in this life business of yours coming together to do things and align the needs of both you and her as a family with the things that are happening in your
Yep.
life?
Yeah, how are we doing that? I mean, I think the first thing I would go back to saying is like if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead anyone else, and like everything happens from the inside out, right? And so the second like term would just be like intentionality, but like I mean, there are a million people who would talk about the importance of goal setting, and you could go for everything from like Lou Holtz, like you've got to like have them sit on your mirror, to all sorts of modern and historical philosophers. But at the end of the day, like um, Whitney and I, like we've been doing and really aided by a lot of your strategic planning for life, and then our own sort of like flavors of the operating system to continue with that metaphor. Like you know, it if I were going back, like it started in 2015, where like in mid January we like set some goals in like a 30-minute meeting. And then we like never really looked back at them again. And then a year later, we were like, well, that didn't work as well as we wanted it to. Like, let's try setting some goals in December. And like you set some goals and you realize like, uh, everybody sets goals, but not everybody is going to achieve their goals. Like, what separates the people who set and achieve goals to people who set and forget them. And like, thank goodness we have this long trajectory. Um, and so we've gotten into a much more rigorous planning rhythm. But to the point of, I guess, intentionality, like every year we sort of sit and we say, like, here are the things that matter to us, and here's what we're going to prioritize. Here are the outcomes we want. Here are the people we want to become. Here's how we want to spend time with our kids. And then when you can like say those things and name them and write them down, then we've got our monthly check-ins and our quarterly check-ins and our date nights on a weekly basis where we can like reflect. And when the big moments come in that become a conflict moment, you can look and you can say, okay, like, if we want to accomplish these things, are we on the same page to go do that? And like, to me, there's a big difference between for like, I've had phases of, I guess, to take a quick time out, like, to act as though I haven't made extraordinary sacrifices at home with my wife and with my kids for my business would be a lie. Like, I've missed out on some really important things, and but I guess what I would say is we've made those decisions mostly consciously, and we've said like, okay, cool, yes, we said we want to accomplish this thing, so missing out on this thing over here because we're pursuing that is worth it. Or actually, you know what? I'm going to reflect, and like, this thing is actually more important than that goal that we set. And the answer to that question doesn't matter, but saving the space to explore which of those matters is probably what has worked. And so, like, every year we've got the goals, and some of them are like outcomes that we're trying to accomplish, and some of them are people we want to become, and some of them are relationships we want to build. But we set them, and then what we'll often say is like, okay, cool, we are on a team, and really, at the end of the day, all we care about is achieving those goals. So whether it's my success that achieves that goal, or Whitney's success that achieves that goal, or my sacrifice or her sacrifice, we are in it together, and we will play different roles at different times in pursuit of that. And so you try to build, that intentionality, that focus, that goal outcome orientation, whatever it is, and then really a team mindset. Because in any partnership, like, if and Whitney and I are both Enneagram threes, which mean we're wired for competition and vanity, which is a tough thing. But like, if we weren't very aligned and we didn't work on that and we didn't struggle through it, honestly, like, when she had success, I might resent it, or when I had success, she might resent it, or when she makes a sacrifice for me to do something, or I make a sacrifice for her to do something, like, all of the shit that you don't want will creep in. And so we've got, all of our reflection and awareness built into those rituals, and really like saying we are a team and we're trying to go there together. And if we get there together, then we're winning, is sort of like the way we've done that.
That's awesome, man. Like, what a great practice. It's even bringing me full circle again to what you mentioned about the upgrades in the software and hardware, where it's like, it's the way that I'm thinking about it in the moment is like that the awareness, like your awareness, and then the processes that you build for that awareness, whether and the practices around that, right? Like whether it's meditation, reflection, weekly meetings, all of the above, is that you're building that like scan tool, like you're kind of scanning the landscape of your software and your hardware and being like, wow, like this thing is running a little red right now. Like we need to like maybe clear that out so we have more space for other things that are happening. And what you said a second ago about how sacrifices are kind of inevitable. There's an inevitability to the sacrifice, but if you're consciously choosing that idea of, yes, this is okay because it's aligned with what we've consciously said we want, independently or together, that outcome is okay, and you can be okay with that. And I think that practice is actually, if I were to kind of put my own ring hat in the ring here, is like the maybe the saving grace to things like marriages or relationships with family and friends, because you're aligning on those things together instead of just doing them independently and saying, yeah, I'm just going to go do this thing. We'll deal with the resent and regret later. Not a big deal. But we're going to come together around these practices. And I know you feel this way too, but the the other thing that I want to share as we're talking with everybody listening is like, and we've said this for many years, but it's like you almost have to treat your lifestyle like you would a thriving organization. Like your lifestyle is an organization of you. and having your wife or your partner, whomever that may be, as your founding partner, and then you're building these goals and core values and mission around your lifestyle. And I think that's the beautiful harmony that you've struck in your life, both growing successful organizations and also a thriving marriage and fatherhood and all the above. But my next question for you, brother, is when you talked about some of those sacrifices, like were there moments along that journey, and maybe this happened between you and Wit, or even just interpersonally, where like you were questioning some of like those things because of the cost of the sacrifice? Where you're saying like, does this do we have to really make sure we're okay with this? And then what do we do about like that reconcile moment where it's like maybe you feel like it is, but she doesn't feel like it is? What happens then? How do we get through that wall
Yeah,
together?
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, yes, innumerable moments like that probably, at the end of the day, and, maybe, with a bit of humility too, like, sometimes the consciousness or the intentionality isn't in the moment, or it isn't proactive, but it's, like, reactive on a tighter feedback loop, like, even a 12-month feedback loop in a marriage is better than a 10 years later, we didn't talk about a thing feedback loop, but, like, a weekly feedback loop or a monthly feedback loop is useful. I mean, there are a number of times where we've said, I mean, we do a like reflection on the last month and what went best and what went worst, and it's like, man, that like decision we made consciously last month, like that's my low. That was way worse and way harder. But the business travel was way harder, or the thing I missed out on, or the return I thought I would get on that time wasn't as great as it was, and the risk reward really didn't pan out. Um, but uh, I think having those feedback loops and trying to tighten those feedback loops is important. If I were trying to like maximize like wisdom and experience density here over the next couple minutes. I also think of like James Clear's Atomic Habits and like stacking things you don't want to do with things that you do enjoy doing. And like, finding ways to make hard things more fun and stuff like that. And like, one example is like, I've started talking to Whitney about like, I want to introduce like an airing of grievances to our planning rhythm where like, hey, let's literally like talk about the grievances we had and like make it almost like fun. Or, we used to like one example was like we used to hate doing our like monthly check-ins or reviewing finances on like Wednesday night when we were tired. And so we started doing it with like a cocktail or a glass of wine on like a Saturday afternoon, while the kids are off doing something else instead. Even like a simple one, like I often will pray while I'm washing my hands because like when else do I have like 5 or 6 consistent windows of 20 or 30 seconds where I can actually do it? And so I think finding ways to make the painful stuff suck less is important, and saying like, hey, if we have to go have a big conversation, let's go on a walk outside, or let's take a long weekend away every month, or something like that. Because in the throes of day to day life, putting the kids down for bed after a long day and trying to have a hard conversation at night is pretty exhausting. And so like we try to, what one of the commitments we made this year is like, hey, every 3 months we're gonna have like a long weekend away where we can cover some of this stuff because like it's just so much better than saying like we have one trip a year where we're gonna figure some of this stuff out. So feedback loops, habit stacking, and finding ways to make the stuff that sucks be it paired with something you enjoy doing. I think have been little unlocks here and there for us.
Man, those are great. I love the idea when you said the idea of a feedback loop of 12 months versus 10 years. I think that one really hit hard, where it's like the approaching something that's difficult or scary or fearful because it might spark, tension in the relationship or in the business, right? If we use that same practice in the form of a business founder, you're with your partners in your group, It's like, that's tough stuff, but if you're building that in as a almost a value, like that becomes a value for you. We're gonna approach tough stuff together. Krista and I always say, let's both come back to the table. Like we're okay leaving the table, like, or maybe I make you mad or she makes me mad or vice whatever happens. But if you're committed and your values to come back to the table together, then you can have those moments of reflection, that feedback loop. That's such a beautiful point for those that are listening, both in the context of relationships and growing an organization with someone. And you mentioned like, and I'm a big stickler on this too, because I think it's true and we're living this every day. But when you introduce like other dependencies into your equation, you mentioned Kate and James now being like a background hum in your operating system. You have to change a lot, right? Like actually the visual metaphor I'll use is when we had Oren, our oldest, who's going to turn 7 Friday. Um, we talked about the visual being like your life is packed into this beautifully packed purse or box. And when you have a child, it all gets dumped out, but there's one or two more things you have to now figure out how to fit into that box. And not everything that you used to do is going to fit back into that box because you have to find places for new things. You have to downsize or get rid of things. And that's that scanning process you mentioned earlier with the OS and the practices using the computer metaphor. So talk to me a little bit about the the way that becoming a parent and as father specifically influenced the way you led yourself and the way you led others. Because I think this is a really profound transition for anybody who's experiencing it or about to experience it.
Yeah, how did becoming a parent change the way I lead myself and others? I'll start talking without really being sure where I'm gonna finish, so bear with me here. Um,
Go for it.
you know, I remember I often compare when Kate was born, who's now 7, to when James was born, who's now 3, and, with Kate, I really didn't like, candidly, didn't enjoy the first, like, 3 months, like, your life is in an upheaval, and I think I, like, woke up one morning and, Whitney was upset with me, but I was like, "Goodness, kid, you're, like, ruining my life," or, something like that, because it is, like, totally, moving everything around, and, like, the second like, when James was here, I was like, "Oh, man, like, what a gift these first 3 months are," and, maybe there's some metaphor there of just, like, having a little bit more perspective and going through it once and wanting to remember those more. But um, I guess if I go back to Kate, I think really started to feel, I don't know, the love when I got to feed her a little bit, or when she started to smile, and all that sort of stuff. And I guess we made some really, again, like, to the point of, like, you can have anything, but you can't have everything. Like, we made some really, I think, conscious decisions. Like, even today, 7 years later, like, if we're both in town, we're having a family dinner at the table every evening. And in order to do that, like, you have to be home. And in order to be home, you have to change your commitments at work. And in order to change your commitments at work, you have to be proactive in your communication. And, like, if I want to, you know, if I want to be as effective and candidly more effective at, 40 than I was at 30, or 30 than I was at 20, like, you know, I mean, if our dynamic days, like, I logged 250 to 300 hours a month. I'm more effective in 120 hours logged now than I would have ever been in 260 hours there. And so, yeah, like, you just have to, I just had to get much better at, like, one of the things I could have said was like, man, being a leader of a business is just too demanding. I have to give up this job now that I want to prioritize these things with my kids. And, like, I suppose that's an outcome that I could have chosen, but, like, I started with, like, man, I really want to be able to do this job, and I really want to be able to be a good parent, and I really want to be able to be a present parent and a present spouse. And so you, like, look at these things, and then you start saying, like, well, how am I going to do that and this? And some of that is being able to hire better leaders, and some of that's forcing yourself to widen your goalposts and get better at delegating, or something like that. So it's like cool, I need to get all this stuff done and I can't let the task expand to fill more hours. So I have to find a way. Um, and I guess, I mean, certainly if I zoom way back 7 or 8 years, I was not half as intentional, half as effective, half as present before kids. And I've like often joked, I'm sure this would get you in trouble somewhere, but like if you like said this was one of your hiring principles, but like I've often joked about like only hiring parents, because if you can figure out how to be an effective professional and a parent, you've like unlocked something that at least I was unable to unlock in my 20s and, early 30s before kids. But maybe all of that is to say, like, I don't know that all of it was that intentional. It was just like a trial by fire of like, all right, you want to be a leader and you want to have this business and you want to do these things, and like go make it work. But had a lot of great mentors and even like models along the way, like people who had done all of it to almost like show you that it was possible along the way. And then some people, not just like models further along, but also like my community going through similar stuff at a similar time to share lessons with, and all that jazz.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I think it's one of those first moments where you and you mentioned this earlier, and we've talked about this already, but you think about these ideas of values, and it's like one of those moments where your values are what are evolving or challenged or shifting. And you say, like, when I think about that metaphor of the bag or the box, it's like, yeah, this thing no longer need that. Like that's no longer a value for me because it doesn't fit anymore. And some of those are values, some of those are activities and rhythms like you used, but you really have to go back to those values. And I want people to also hear, and I'm going to reiterate this from what you shared, is the idea of I use the term levers, like, and I come from a design background, as many people listening know, and the way that I think about life and lifestyle is like just as an iterative design project. It's just an iterative design project, and so the requirements are always changing, like, "I want it to do this," or "I would like to do this," and that's what you're sharing with our audience today. It's like, you hit these moments in your journey where you're saying, "I value this and I value this, so how do I make this thing happen? What levers do I pull to make those things fall into place, at least for me to take the chance and the step to go forth and
Yep.
explore those?" And I think that's such a profound lesson for everybody hearing this, is that some of the greatest success, quote unquote, criteria involves that like continuous iteration, like that you're iterating on yourself over and over and over again. And as you're doing it, either chosen, or not, maybe it's an event in your life that's making you really forced, maybe it be an injury or a death, unfortunately, whatever comes your way. You're using those moments as a chance to iterate yourself and continue to pull the levers of your design project to make those things work for the best way that you know how for your version of success. So I love that feedback, brother. And obviously, it's one of the things that I've admired the most about you and your guys' journey in life. And I want to ask like a couple closing questions as we begin to land this plane. But one of the things that I'm curious about as you think about your next vision, and maybe you mentioned earlier, like you're pulling some of those levers right now. You're saying like this transition of exiting this role as CEO of a company and moving on to the next thing, you're pulling levers. Um, what kinds of things are inspiring and exciting to you, and what kind of criteria are you using in your life moving forward from the version of you that you just were to the next version of your operating system as you move into the next phase of life?
Yeah. What am I finding inspiring and interesting? I'll go like extrinsic inspiration first, and then maybe intrinsic. Some of the extrinsic stuff that I certainly find inspiring is I really I guess I wouldn't be a founder, and some of this will be a cliche at some level, but like just AI and what I can do with it is so inspiring to me, and the ways I can use it to be more effective and to do more research and to be more mindful and to show up in the next time I'm grabbing coffee with someone more present and knowing more about them, or whatever the case may be. I mean, like what you can do with AI at this moment in history is just so remarkably fascinating, and I find that inspiring. Um, on the more intrinsic side, Um, Kind of to the point of I feel like I'm not just at an OS reboot or a hardware upgrade, but like a totally new piece of hardware. Um, and having like the blessing to spend a couple months where like I actually have no responsibilities and to like to be fortunate enough to be able to sit where like 100% of my time is free. And like one of the examples, I was talking to a friend the other day. I'm like, man, when your time is full, the idea of like giving up another 2 or 3 hours feels like nothing. And yeah, you can do it. And then when your time is totally vacant and you're asked to give up 3 hours, you just like I'm like, whoa, I value these hours way more than I ever valued these hours prior. And I just hope that's a lesson I can take with me. And I'm trying to really internalize it and feel it because I I have been so I just give away my time so freely or have, and that has paid dividends in my career by a wide margin. But like, man, now that I don't have that time, or now that I don't have to, now that I have all that time back, when I have to like give up 3 or 4 hours for something, I'm like, man, I better really want to do that. And I hope that feeling sticks, because I think it's another level of intentionality that I can, uh, pay homage to going forward, to just be like, man, I really don't want to give away this time, or I really want to be able to do this thing, and like look at. I mean, I don't know if I were to put trying to put numbers on it, but like I probably used to give away my hours like they were worth $100, and now I think about my hours like if there's not some real in my soul benefit to that hour, it's probably a 5,000 plus dollar hour. And then the other side of it is like when there is that soul, like when something does feel like it's really giving back to like who I am and what I want, like I'll give those hours away freely, because the internal reward is so great. But man, like if it's not paying dividends on like enriching my soul, like you know, I just need extraordinarily compensated to give that time away to think through like a term of dollars. So I'm like very inspired by that feeling, and I don't want to lose it. So I'm trying to figure out how to like make sure it's not like an enlightenment that I got one day that I lost, and actually figure out how to fully integrate it into my life and how I think about my time.
Yeah, man, you're going through it, right? I mean, I think that's what's so beautiful about these times is you're in the moment on this podcast. You're like reflecting and addressing like the value of that piece of your life, right? And how you spend your time, who you spend it with, what you spend it on. Like that's such a beautiful thing to be doing
Yeah.
like in real time and showing everybody like
Yeah.
this is
I
a
mean,
possible thing.
I was
And I think
even
like
I was
um
even sitting we had like a family dinner last night with my mom and sister and the kids, and we went out to Dewey's Pizza, and there was like a football game on in the background, and I like had this moment where I was like, man, remember when I used to just like sit on a couch and watch 9 hours of football on Sunday? Like I couldn't even tell you who plays for like it's just like that part of my life is just like gone, and nothing against football, but like, it's just like, ah, like, thank goodness I can spend my Sunday and not even give an ounce of energy to, like, wondering what it would have been like to be watch and, like, I don't even totally know how that happened, but it was a weird moment of reflection last night where, like, that game was on, and I was like, I don't know. I didn't even think about the fact that there are football games, let alone who's playing. And like what a difference in time. And then I was because of that, I was able to spend that whole Sunday with my family doing stuff that I wanted. And it's just such a difference in a decade or whatever the case may be.
yeah, man, you threw out that thing from your bag a long time ago. That thing is gone. That did not serve you anymore. And I think what I wanna also just reflect back is man, like, and I can say this pretty proudly about most of the things in which we're doing in our own lives. Obviously not without struggle and hardship, as you alluded to early on. I think a lot of the growth and the joy comes from the spear, where it's like this is equally hard, but it's equally uplifting, right? I think that embracing that model as a mantra for life has been big for us. But is that when you're in those moments when you're honoring your vision and your values and you're literally reflecting real time that you're living your life of clarity and of purpose, how you've defined it, like that's a pretty gratifying feeling. Like that's a feeling that not I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't think many actually have the ability to do or say, maybe because of skills, time, situation, circumstance, whatever it might be. But you're living that moment and you're saying, wow, this is what I want. And I think, and I'm interested in maybe your thoughts on this briefly, but it's like, I think that's what maybe under all of the like form-based things that we're pursuing and doing, like we're all looking for that version of like peace and contentment with life. And maybe that's a little bit out there and philosophical, but I mean, I think those moments are beautiful moments when you're like in it real time and feeling that peace from the things that you've done in
Yeah.
your life.
Yeah, I mean, sort of what comes to mind there, um, I as I think about, the last maybe even the last couple months of my entrepreneurial journey, like, certainly have, yeah, I don't know, an immense amount of privilege in my life to be able to say, "Oh, man, I'm on my way out," and have a moment to sit back and think, um, and, one of the other maybe benefits of this entrepreneurial journey is, like, I feel like I've been able to learn things through, like, traumatic experiences that are relatively minimal in a package of, like, real world trauma. Like, my life didn't have to fall apart to experience what I experienced with a business partner falling out, or, all of those things. But, I think, like, aside from the macro elements of being able to reflect, I think even, like, yeah, maybe you can't take months and months off like I've had the opportunity to do, to, like, sit and reflect and be able to feel what you just called out in this moment. But I think that's why finding quiet in your life is important, and that whether that quiet is journaling or a walk in nature, or, like, for me it's, I mean, it's very much running, lifting weights, prayer, journaling. But, like, everyone can find their thing that lets them feel a bit of quiet. And like, I think, like, I used to try to be really binary and really extreme in the changes I would make, and I'd wanna go from, like, a 0 to 100, or 100 to a 0. And I think that's a it's a little bit of a masochistic thing to do, and it can be a recipe for failure. But, like, if you can say, like, "Oh, that thing I was doing," whatever it is for somebody listening, that gives me just a little bit more quiet in my life than all the noise and chaos that's elsewhere. And, like, what if in the next week I just dialed that up 1 point, and then 1 point again, and, like, all of a sudden you can find more quiet on a daily, weekly, whatever it is basis, and a little bit less noise. And, like, the magic happens when you have that quiet. And I think it really happens when you can have a combination of that quiet in solitude, and then that quiet in community with others. And if you can find ways to do those things, I think you can have some of those breakthroughs in small moments. If the couple months I've had off to learn some of this stuff feels, yeah, like, oh, cool, that's great, but not necessarily achievable for someone listening. I think, like, just slowly dialing up the things in our life that give us that bit of quiet, to find more of it, to have a little more spaces. I have no idea if that's on the same wavelength as what you were saying, but that's what was, like, coming up for me as you were sharing that.
It is. Dude, it's totally on the same wavelength, and I think that, like compounding interest, right? Like, the beauty of that phenomenon, right? Like, it that in the practice of your space and your time. And I think, to reiterate what you shared earlier in your one of your answers, where you said, like, like it gets like when your computer gets so tired of like running those programs that you've not like cleared out and done it, it's because like, and use the metaphor of a computer and then think about the inputs of life, like as life happens, like all these things are coming at you, like priorities and your KPIs from your job and the responsibilities of parenthood or being a good husband or wife or partner, maintaining your home base or getting furniture for your house, like all paying your bills, like all these things are just like things that are coming at you. And if you're not giving yourself those moments of space to say, wow, like I just need to like pause the game for a second and like give me a chance to like really tune into myself. Cause and this comes from personal experience too, and it may not be universal to everybody, but I don't think that great answers come from loud. I think that good answers come from stillness, and good answers come from presence, and good is relative to your journey and your situation, but that space that you cultivate in yourself to give you the directional energy to say, I'm going there now. I'm going to go in that direction. It does give you space and energy to do those things amidst even a really difficult journey of living and growing. So yeah, man, it was complete same wavelength, and I think those moments are peace. I think those moments are complete peace for anybody who has the chance to give that to themselves and has the desire to give that to themselves. I want to end a little bit with some gratitude, man, for one, what you're doing in the world. I mean, I think like as cliche as it sounds, like to change anything is to change yourself, and like you're someone embodying this idea of like changing the version of you over and over again, and leading yourself and helping to lead others in your family and your businesses that you're running, and all those you get a chance to be in your aura and your space. I think it's a valiant effort, so I'm giving you a much gratitude for living that journey step by step. And then for all the wisdom that you shared today with myself, I'm learning from you constantly, my man. I have a lot of respect and admiration for you. And I know people listening today like got something out of this, which is why we do this. So super grateful for you being here today, brother.
Yeah, yeah, grateful for you too, man. This was a pleasure, and to avoid just regurgitating, I think I feel a lot of those same things back at you, and that's the good side of that's like the ideal community, right? Where you're the student and the teacher, and you're being filled up as you pour out at the same rate. So yeah, it's very positive sum getting to spend time with you.
Well said, man. Well said. Hey, if people are interested in finding out more about you or maybe some stuff that you've done or where you're going, like where would you point people to connect or learn more about John Poma and his journeys?
Yeah, yeah. Most of the places you could have found me online 5 years ago are gone now. I've still got two left, and maybe in a couple of years those will be gone too. But for now, I'm on Twitter or X, I suppose it is, at Poma JP. So Poma, and then JP. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn, whatever the profile prefix is, but it's Poma JP as well. And then just Jonathan Poma if you look me up. But I'm there at least for a few more years, and maybe someday we'll be fortunate enough to be able to disappear from the internet.
Cool, man. Well, thank you again for your time, your energy. Looking forward to sharing
Appreciate
this
you.
one with the
Yep.
world, brother.
Likewise.